details, but let me leave it by saying you're only trying to go through your work, your novel, and find 7 moments, 7 moments to pull out and place in their proper orientation in a script outline. And with those 7 elements in place, you have already made your script, maybe not brilliant, but you have made it competitive because it now bears the structure that most Hollywood producers not just are looking for, but they demand. There's a whole list of things that they're looking for, which we'll go over. Now, again, why would you adapt? We'll go over the financial upside of an adaptation, but 52% of the top 2,000 movies of the last 20 years are adaptations, be it an adaptation from a newspaper article, from a video game, from a book, a magazine article. The Pirates of the Caribbean movies are adaptations from a ride. Anything is possible as an adaptation. Source material, throw the doors open in terms of what might be source material, but we're talking about the novel as adapted to the screenplay. And you have an embarrassment of riches in your novel that makes it so difficult to choose exactly what to look for. Those 7 points, 8 if you count the winding up at the end of the story, are crucially important. But what else are you going to leave out? Well, you've got to leave out all the thinky bits, all the parts where your character is having these introspective moments, parts where your expository parts where your narrator might be going on about what the character is experiencing internally. All of that must give way to the action, for in a script, as you all know, action is character. It's whatever the character does, that's who, in the language of film that we have today, whatever the character does is who that character really is. That's who they are at their core. You want to make that character interesting, have what they say be very different from what they do. That adds a little element of surprise. And that sort of tension is very important. We'll go a little bit more into character, but I want you to bear in mind the two ideas. The very obvious one that we always are talking about in our writing seminars and classes, what is the character's goal? Well, what does the character want? All right. The obverse to that is, what does the character need? And the greater the distance between what the character wants and what the character truly needs, that creates this vast amount of tension in your character, even by themselves, and you will create an even more compelling character. Anyway, the bad news, let me just sort of recommend a book very quickly of a colleague in this industry. The author's name is John Robert Marlowe. He's a colleague of mine. We both work for the editorial department. We assess books for movie potential there. I'm not cadging work. You can always talk to me directly. But John Robert Marlowe has taken the time for us to codify the process of adaptation. And he's very explicit, very detailed. And his book is called Make Your Story a Movie. Make Your Story a Movie by John Robert Marlowe. And the subtitle is Adapting Your Book or Idea for Hollywood. You couldn't get a better book. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of the things that you'll see in that book, should you care to read it. But that's sort of in addition to the recording of this gathering that we have tonight for your reference, having that book that you can yank off the shelf and say, and check off, did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? In my adaptation process will also be very handy to you. John Robert Marlowe, incredible piece of work. So I didn't want to go any further without acknowledging the great value that you'll find in his writing on this very topic.
Robert, would you be able to give us his spelling? Is it Marlowe with an E or without an E?
Thank you for asking. There's no E on the end of Marlowe. And yeah, John Robert Marlowe. It's a bestseller. That means in the top 100 in the adaptation category on Amazon. So just so you know that, you can check them all out, but he's a gooder, and I have to respect his work very much and the clear way he lays it out. Now, we may have experienced with the uptick of emojis and people who are able to somehow, adapt their thoughts into emojis and convey them to each other by text or Facebook posts or Twitter posts, that the actual act of reading is in decline, in some circles more than in others. One crucial circle is that it is in decline among Hollywood producers. It's terrible news. Why did you write the novel first? Well, producers feel tremendously emboldened, encouraged, and comforted knowing that the screenplay idea that they're looking at exists in another medium that other people can experience. It bolsters their confidence. They could read reviews, perhaps, but they may never read the source material. So if you find in your work on your adaptation that in seeking out the particular 7 milestones that the story will require to make that producer comfortable, it doesn't exist in your book, it's okay. You can add it into the script. You can even add it into the book, depending on how flexible your publisher is. But there's so much great advantage in readdressing your own material in the screenplay format. You kind of get a second crack at it, and a very lucrative crack at it, I might say. Now, why is it important to embolden and support the producer? Well, the ask that you are making in presenting a script based on your book is that that producer marshal $60 to $100 million to go out and find that money in order to make your story, your script, into a movie. To a lesser extent, depending on who you are, or a greater extent, you're also asking about 2 years of their lives. Now, the bigger producers are amortizing their risk by having several projects in the works, called a slate when it gets significant, like 5 or 6 pieces that they're working on in various stages of development and production. But again, tens of millions of dollars, 2 years of their lives, you are making by handing them this script a very big ask. So it's got to be not a great script, not an awesome script. It's got to be a competitive script. And part of the things that make it competitive, there's a whole checklist, we're going to go over it, are having those 8 sort of plot point milestones that many of you are familiar with. You may know them by other vocabulary from other disciplines. Various people in various classes will tell you, well, it's a midpoint, or it's the point of no return, or something of that nature. We're going to cover that. Now, you've put an effort into your manuscript for your book, 250 to 500 pages, 100,000 words, like I was saying before. From a publisher, you might get an advance. You might get an advance of 5 figures, 10K, 20K. They're very rare these days. Now, if you've got a screenplay, 100 pages, 120 pages at the most, 20,000 words, 100,000 words, 20,000 words. You might get a sale of $300,000, $600,000. $1 million is not unheard of, especially if your story is part of a series that can be franchised in the imaginations of this Hollywood producer. I don't know what you've earned from your books. We've all done the labor. We know what the book returns are. I was sharing with Sharon before, I'm a hybrid. I decided based on the offers made that I would take my book out independently. I worked with a company called Telemachus Press that was brilliant. And then 3 years in, I received an email from Lucifer Verlag, as Sharon mentioned, which is a German company, and they wanted to buy the German language rights to the stories. So I'm kind of a hybrid. I'm indie at the start and in the English language. I retain all the rights in that realm, but I have sold the German language rights to this German company in a legacy deal of advance and residuals and royalties. As I mentioned before, a producer is emboldened and encouraged when they see that your property it exists in another medium. If there's a book out there, they love it. If it's a book and a script, that's great. Could you, or your entertainment attorney, simply sell the film rights? It's a difficult job that you're asking the entertainment attorney to achieve. And what do you get for it on the other side of it? It's good. You will have some revenue from it. You will have to hand the book to a producer. The producer will hand the book to a reader. That book will go on to a stack of books that the reader is asked to review. If you're lucky, they will have asked to read the book in galleys or in ARCs before publication. That means they're more interested. But it's very difficult to get a producer to read these days. It is easier to get a producer to read a script based on a book. And again, you'll email it in, and that producer is going to say, thank you very much, hand it off to a reader, and that reader is going to go through their internal assessment process where they're looking at character development, plot line, plot development, writing, dialogue. They will break it and tear it down into all these essential pieces, and then they will do pass, which means we don't want it, recommend with prejudice, we kind of like it a bit, or recommend, enthusiastically recommend, depending on how the language is on their particular thing. But that reader's work, it's piecework. They're paid on the number of scripts that they read. Nobody ever got zinged for saying no to a property. People do get in trouble in Hollywood for saying yes. You've got to make it as easy as possible for a producer to say yes. Now, depending on your book's success, it might hasten the sale to a Hollywood producer. That's good. There's also that reverse halo effect that when the movie comes out, it will bolster sales. I think James Dickey's book Deliverance came out in 1970, to use a really old example. Deliverance came out in 1970. Borman's film Deliverance, starring the preeminent star of the age in terms of box office money, Burt Reynolds, came out in 1972, and that spawned 3 million more copies to be sold. And that's pre-Amazon. That's where you had to go to a bookstore or call a bookstore and ask them to go and fight with the publisher for copies, because there's a big run-up. 3 million additional sales. And let's say that you're in that realm where you're getting $1 a book. It's not bad. 3 million books sold, not 3 million in total books revenue. So it's significant. And that's happening with The Martian and other stories, and it's constantly happening. You can imagine that Amazon, with its new studio, is very interested in looking internally at book properties that are published there to see their performance. Crazy enough, some screenwriters are even asked to take their script and write the book for the script, so that it's called the novelization of the script. It's kind of a reverse adaptation. You'll be asked to do it, somebody else will be asked to do it. It's good if you can do it. You're all experienced novelists. Now, you could sell, as I was saying, the film rights. The film rights will net you participation. It's very hard to separate you during the development process from the fact that they're working on the film rights, and so there will be a revenue stream. Let's say you have handed that book to a producer. Somehow there was an understanding of the sales, there was an understanding of the quality of the reviews, there was some excitement about the nature of the book, and they want it. Well, that's where your participation ends with the sale of the film rights. And they still have the job of finding a screenwriter and hiring a screenwriter to adapt your book for you. If you come in and your flag is already planted on the screenplay territory, they cannot move forward without including that extra revenue stream for the screenplay itself. And that's very important for the extra 18 to 20,000 words. With that extra effort, some attention to the requirements of the industry, that revenue stream is larger than the film rights themselves can be. We're talking, well, what is a Writers Guild minimum is about 70 something thousand dollars. And it goes up from there, especially if there's a book appended to this deal. Um, it can be closer to $1 million. So it's very exciting to think about that, what that extra 18 to 20,000 words could mean for you and the revenue that you're hoping to make. And then when people go back and buy the book, it gets even more exciting for you with that extra revenue stream. So the main thing that you've got to worry about, make sure that you hold all the rights to the book that you're working on, yours, that's not a big issue, and that you are, you know, doing your best effort to get that screenwriting done in the most industry conforming way. This is not, remember that great time when you were working on your first book and it was just you and the book and you didn't have to think about anything else, and then the book came out and then you've got to, or it didn't come out and you've got to find your agent and then you've got to rewrite for the agent and then you've got to, they get a deal with the publisher and you got to rewrite for several editors perhaps within the house, and oh my gosh, now you've got a social media life to manage and you've got to show up for readings. Think back to that halcyon time when you were, it was just you and that manuscript, and then bam, everything gets busy. Suddenly it stops feeling creative. You feel more like it's a desk job. But this will help blunt some of the difficulty and the pain associated with the busyness that comes to impinge upon your creativeness. Um, I would encourage you for the quick, infusive, and exciting hit to go and find a Robert McKee seminar online or in person, should that day ever come when we can go out. It's like you're buying a ticket to the best 2.5 day one-man show. He's very entertaining. I've never watched him on a Zoom or on the internet. I do recommend you work with him or attend his seminar on story structure. It's very supportive, very helpful, and you will walk out feeling tremendously encouraged. May I ask by a show of hands, how many of you have undertaken a screenplay already? Okay, I see Mark, Gail, good, gotcha. So this is still new territory, but again, every time you speak, you're adapting neurological energy into sound that we can all understand. You're a great adapter. You've written the book. Adapting is an act of discernment in the main. You can do this. If you've written a book, you've got the chops to undertake this. Now, so we talked a little bit about selling the film rights versus having both the film rights and a screenplay to sell along with it. You planted your flag there. Even if they make changes, even if they throw out the script, that you are on board, and it's much more difficult for a producer as the process moves forward to separate you, should they wish, from the writing process. It's great to plant that flag. Now, what does the screenplay sale look like? Well, it starts with an option. That could be in the $15,000 to $20,000 realm. It could be more, and that is paid against a final sale price, which would be due to you on the first day of principal photography, which is when the stars are on the set, cameras are rolling. That really means it's happening, and so they're going to start paying various people, including you as the writer. And again, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Think about what you've made so far in your book. I'm doing that. Think about the potential that you could have by writing an additional 18 to 20,000 great words. Okay. We've talked about the revenue. It sounds very crass. Let's talk about the details of what's happening in a producer's office. If you hand in a script, they don't need to go and find somebody to write it. They might find somebody to rewrite it. They might start by asking you to do some rewrites here and there. And that's a little bit of a test to see what the sound of your voice is like in a meeting. Are you cantankerous? Are you unwilling to make the least bit of change? Are you helpful? Are you willing? Are you encouraging of the ideas that you heard? Can you incorporate those ideas well? Then you stay on the project a little bit longer. But if you save that producer the difficulty of finding somebody to write that script, let's say they're excited about your story, if you've already done that, your script moves toward the top of the stack. Also, having that script helps that producer with what I would call an internal sale. They have co-producers and CEOs and perhaps even a board of directors to which they're responsible, that they need to persuade that this is the great property. If they've got a script in their hand, something that has been adapted into the language that they understand, it helps your case tremendously than if you are flogging a book alone. You can do that if the book has gonzo New York Times bestseller sales. It's much less difficult. Your agent can help you with it. If you don't have an agent, your entertainment attorney can help you with that. I do recommend having a good entertainment attorney on your team very much. Having a script in hand shows the producer and helps the producer show other producers, financiers, directors, actors, that your book idea can work as a movie. There is a trend, a disturbing trend, to have writers and directors cast a scene in their script, and it's called a proof of concept. Basically, because folks aren't reading so much these days, they're asking you to shoot a critical scene in their movie so that they can see it as a movie. Fortunately, that's not everybody. There are things that are necessary, like the presentation deck, that are crucial. We can talk about that. That can be as involved or as simple as you like. But again, it is kind of a visual appeal to the producer to support them for what they want to do, which is sell that thing internally and externally. Your script is the key ingredient in that, but there are one or two ancillary pieces to hire to that. Let's see. Talked about the money. I don't want to dwell on that. I want to get to the specifics. All right, the pitch. We've all heard about pitch challenges, pitch meetings. You've got a great person who is coming, I believe, to talk about pitches. The one that I've heard about is the 10-second pitch. It says who the story is about, what is their goal, and what is the obstacle to their goal. 10 seconds. I'll read one that is in the Marlowe book. An emotionally shuttered Wall Street tycoon hires a vivacious hooker for the week, falls in love, and struggles to forge his first meaningful relationship. That's 10 seconds if I talk faster like I'm with a producer in an elevator and I'm panicking. That's Pretty Woman. Or here's a very simple one. Can you believe with the movie that comes from this concept that it was initially this simple? A family struggles to escape a remote island park whose main attractions, genetically restored dinosaurs, have been set loose by power failure. So simple. You've got to render your story down to that kind of a simple piece. That's very important. I'll give you the Dead Rise one since you are going to be reading that. In order to get that, by the way, just go to my website, Robert Blake Whitehill, sign up for the email. I'll know the people that sign up I do like 2, maybe 3 letters that I send out to my list in a year, but I'll know who you are. And that's how I'll be able to know who to send out the adaptation, the book, and the deck. Dead Rise is the name of the thing. Former SEAL Ben Blackshaw, that's who, battles to save his remote island home from mercenaries, that's the obstacle, to recover a fortune in gold and a suitcase bomb that could start World War III. It's very Jason Bourne. In fact, my editor, Richard Marek, was the guy that bought the Bourne series and bought the Hannibal series from Thomas Harris. So we were a perfect match. He died recently, so it's a real bummer. But anyway, so you see, who, goal, obstacle. That's basically what we're talking about. I'll spare you the other ones. Your story has to have a relatable hero so that in the business to consumer realm, the consumer can envision spending $18 or $20 wherever you're getting your movies now during the pandemic, whether it's through a streamer or a one-time rental through AMC or something of that nature. But it's got to be a relatable hero that people want to hang out with for a couple of hours and are willing to put money down for. Can the potential audience relate to this person in some way? Is there an interesting flaw in this person? Are there complexities that draw and engage our attention? What's important to the hero? And if it's an anti-hero, that person has to do well in the end. It's got to be an emotionally compelling story. Does the hero have skin in the game? What you think will happen as an audience member cannot be what happens. Robert McKee talks about the obligatory scene. You'll see 10 minutes of a movie and you say, I know how this has got to end. And it may provide a great deal of satisfaction if that very ending that you've envisioned is provided in an interesting way. But it might be more interesting if that obligatory scene that has been sort of placed in our minds, because by now we are saturated in story and we know where things go. My 11-year-old son can predict the next line in various key moments in movies. We could all do it, almost word for word without ever having seen the movie before. So, that's the obligatory scene. The stakes for the hero must be enormous, whether it's like Little Miss Sunshine, I've got to get my daughter to the beauty pageant, but my father dies in the meantime. Basically, you're taking your hero, putting him up a tree, you've heard this before, and you're throwing rocks at them. But then the rocks have to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it's got to be grenades. So we're trying to build up the tension, but we collapse the timeline of the story into the minimum amount possible. I try to make a Blackshaw story take place within 24 hours so that there's always a pressure to me as a writer, so I don't bore myself or you, to make the story interesting. And that works very well in a movie. Languorous scenes don't have no place in a thriller. A slightly comedic scene, not too broad, that can give a little bit of relief to the tension and allow people to recoil the tension and wind up the spring before the final denouement, the showdown. That is okay. A little humor, but man, keep the pace up, keep the pressure on is what I would encourage you to do. Let's see. Ticking clock, that dirty bomb that I mentioned in Dead Rise, it does have a timer ticking down to 0, 24 hours away. So that's very important. But it could be smaller stakes, it could be bigger stakes, but it's got to be totally crucially important to the main character. Another thing that a producer is looking for is a very strong visual potential. I'm not talking about massive cataclysmic gun battles and Death Stars blowing up, but is it visually compelling? Have you got different locations in mind that are very interesting to look at? I took in the second book, I went to the Atacama Desert in Chile. Then I went up to the Hudson Strait in Canada, where the tide drops 40 feet out. And if there's ice, people can go down in among these sort of vaulted cathedrals of ice and pick mussels and clams and oysters off the bottom. But if they wait too long, the tide comes back in after about 20 minutes and you drown. So that's a nice place for a set piece, but they can't for your introduction to Hollywood, it cannot be too massive. You're not going to come out with Avatar at 450 million. You might come out with Terminator, which was 6.5 million, 4 million of which went to Schwarzenegger. So manage the level of the set pieces, but keep the stakes important to the main character. Okay. 90%. 90% of those films that are made are 3-act structure. There's this momentum and ebb of the energy that we've discussed. I'm watching my time here, Sharon. We're at 7:49. Can we go a little past 8 o'clock? Is that cool by you all? All right, good. Now we're going to get down a little bit into those particular points. In Act 1, we show the world what a normal day looks like, and then we bring in the aspect of that day that is unlike any other that propels our story forward, the inciting incident. And by the end of Act 1, let's say in 3 acts, 120 pages, basically, we're talking around page 30, roughly, or thereabouts, maybe a little later. Yes, that's when the mission begins. The protagonist, we know who the protagonist, we know what their normal life is, and somebody throws a monkey wrench into their life, and it becomes an extraordinary day, and they may well at first decline to take up the journey and to take up the cause. Luke Skywalker wasn't really into hanging out with Obi-Wan at the start of Star Wars, but eventually he was persuaded. I think was it the death of his parents or his aunt and uncle that persuaded him finally to say, I got to do this. Act 2 is a compounding of the problems. Rocks become bigger rocks that turn into grenades kind of thing. And by about page 55 or 60, we hit the midpoint. No turning back. There's no possible way that the hero or heroine can stop this path forward. Now, here's the other thing. It's like, I don't know if y'all are familiar with something called the Lagrange point in astrophysics. It's this point somewhere, it's several points actually, between Earth and the moon where the gravity is equal. And you could put a satellite or a rock or something right there and it wouldn't move because it is perfectly equal, the gravity of the moon and the gravity of the Earth. Obviously, it would be closer to the moon in the case of the moon because it's smaller. But it's like a Lagrange point where at the end of Act 2, if the character was prone to suicide, it's so bad, this is where it would happen. They can't move forward. But as we discussed, nor can they move back. And this can either be a single moment of cataclysm, or it can be a sequence of smaller moments that all lead to the same result. I can't go back and I can't go forward. The stakes have to be that high and that compelling. From that extreme low point, the character gets a realization. Maybe it's a child in jeopardy. Maybe it's a realization of what's truly important in life. And they somehow dredge up the energy to move forward. They concoct a new plan and it either works or it doesn't. So 3 acts, 7 basic plot points. You've already written them in your book. You just have to dig in and decide what they are and find them. and organize them in your script in a particular order, in a particular place, which those readers and that producer will be looking for. You've had your say with the manuscript of the book, and now there's an industry that is offering tremendous resources in exchange for your complying to what they need to help you help bring on other assets and other people to get this story told and in a theater. You've had your say. Now we have to, I look at it like this. I built the cabinet. The person I built it for says, nice cabinet. I like it. I'll buy it. But I like different hardware on it. I like a little bit of a different hinge and a different pull, a different knob over here. And what am I going to say? Take your $1 million and stuff it? No, I'm going to say, are you thinking brass or nickel plated? What are you thinking in terms of the new hardware for this cabinet? I'm all ears. Anyway, so inciting incident, the first act turn where we're compelled, where the character is compelled, male, female, whoever he or she is, or they are, to move into an action that they never would do before, the midpoint where they can't go back, the low point where they can't go forward, the second act turn where they feel like they've got an idea of how they can move forward, they drag themselves forward, climax, denouement, wrap up, hero's journey, 3-act structure. There you go. Now, in terms of character, there's some reasons why a character will change their behavior, will completely do an about face. And I'm sure you're aware of this already from your study, so forgive me if I'm reiterating something that you've already heard. A character who gets what they always wanted and it's all they hoped for, that could make a character go crazy. What if they get that all-consuming power? What does it turn them into? It is a legitimate, in the eyes of any audience, it can legitimately explain a change in character that otherwise would be inexplicable and inauthentic in the eyes of the audience. Because remember, we're 100 years into the history of film, 100 more years. We have become storytelling machines. We can tell them and we can read them, and we know when something doesn't ring true. So it's something to bear in mind. Here's another reason the character might change, that might get them from I'm going to kill myself to I've got to move on. Getting what they always wanted, and it's nothing like what they dreamed of. Like, wow, I thought I was going to like this. Some Kind of Wonderful is a great example of that. I'm going for this girl, but it's actually this girl that's been there all the time. Not getting what you always wanted, but finding something better, whether it's more precious. And this speaks to a very important thing that will make your character fascinating. I told you, we've already talked about what a character wants, the goal. Now we need to find out what a character needs. A person's been walking through the desert. They say, I want water. They get handed bottles of water as they go. But it's only at the end when they reach the sea and they jump in and they become a mer person or a mermaid, merman, that we know, they didn't just want water, they needed water. But it's got to be interesting. Got to make it interesting by, if you can, separate the two needs and wants as much as you possibly can. I thought I needed $1 million, but what I really needed was this great gig in a country store that I own in a quiet little Vermont mountain town. That's what I really needed to make myself feel whole. And maybe there's a relationship involved that makes that all wonderful as well. Keep that tension so that we as an audience might know what they really need, but we can't stop them hurtling forward toward what they think they want. Here's another thing some of you may have heard this before. What drives people? And this is be any character, if you feel like applying this, they act from fear of not getting what they want or fear of losing what they have. And if it's both, it's even doubly compelling. Fear of not getting what they want, fear of losing what they have. Your lead role's got to be actor friendly. It's got to give the actor an opportunity to stretch, to show range. It's got to be a role perhaps that they have not played before, unless, they're, John Wayne and they're going to be a cowboy somehow, no matter what. But even he had The Quiet Man and The Green Berets and movies like that. It's got to be an actor friendly film to attract the big actor name, to attract the bankable star. It's been proven that at the expense of an A-list actor does not always translate into box office success. You're far better putting the money that you would give an A-list actor into production values on that it would appear on the set. Better music, better sound, better color, a variety of scripts, a few extra shooting days, or maybe a reshoot, make a scene that was pretty good even better. But insurance companies, and there's always an insurance company, as well as financiers, are more comfortable not only with the 3-act structure, but with an A-list star. So that character has the character has got to show a depth of emotion, a range of emotion. It's got to be good character to draw them in. These days, about 110 pages is what they're looking for. Sid Field's book, Screenplay, is a great book for some basics. But if you go too long to 120 pages, the producers might think you're an amateur, a little amateurish. Stick around 110 pages if you can. A publisher putting out a book, a typical deal, is going to spend about $80,000 to get that book out. That's the printing, that's the cost of paying the overhead of paying the editors, the PR, marketing, advertising. $80,000. And still that publishing industry is in a jam. Basically on a 300-page book, that's about 266 pages per book. A screenplay is 1 minute of screen time per page. Studios are spending $60 to $100 million for an average film. That's about $10,000 per minute on the low end for a horror movie like Saw, or $3 million per minute on the high end for a movie like Avatar, which is $450 million in cost to make, 162 minutes long, I think. Yeah. A typical movie is more in the realm of 500,000 to 100,000. $500,000 to $1 million per minute. That's the nature of the game that you're entering with your 18,000 additional words of effort. You might say it's worth it. I say it is worth it. We're not talking about making Dr. Zhivago or Avatar or some great blockbuster movie. We're talking about moving you as a writer into a realm where larger sums of money are available and normal. Comedies come in at about 105 to 110 pages, action thrillers around 115 pages. If you're up at 120 pages, it might be later in the development process and nobody's really counting pages anymore because they're too excited about the idea by that point. It'll always be at the back of your mind, but and it must be at first, but later on in the development process, it can regress a little bit in importance. But so those are baselines for the script that you initially hand in that you hope will get the producer's interest. Now, don't do too many Death Star scenes. Keep it simple as much as you possibly can. Everything that's in your script is there for a reason. It's kind of the low-fat, low-carb kind of writing. You already had your chance. We've already had our chance when writing our novels to just lay out there and explore every idea we might have wished to explore. Now we're into the haiku of writing, where everything there, every syllable is counted, and we must make it count and have as much impact as possible. Well, formatting is something that people ask about. A couple $100 will get you Final Draft or Movie Magic Screenwriter. They help you so much in terms of the actual industry standards. You don't have to futz around with margins here and there. Don't move off of the defaults of the original screenwriting program, because the producers and the readers will know if you've written a 125-page script, but you've decided to fudge it by making your speech and dialogues wider. They'll see it immediately. Stick with the initial settings of Movie Magic Screenwriter or Final Draft. Both are fine. Both are accepted in the industry. You might hear more about Final Draft, but I personally work with Movie Magic Screenwriter. It's just me. They export to other formats, to PDFs, to rich text formats very easily. So don't worry about that. Screenwriting programs support you in conforming to the expectations of the industry. And for $99 to $200, depending, it is an investment that is well worthwhile. And it makes editing a much simpler prospect as well. Now, every scene has got to do two of three things, and better if it does three. It's got to advance the plot, it's got to reveal character with an action, and it's got to build a little bit of a backstory. So we don't come to that moment in the script where we see the star start looking all bummed out, and you can feel it coming. Here's the backstory of why I'm so miserable. And it's going to be, 5, 7, 10 sentences all in one place. And you can feel it coming. How many of you have said, oh God, here we are with the backstory explanation? Yeah, okay. It's like that. So, scene does three things. It advances the plot, reveals character, builds on the backstory. So it should do all three. It's great if your story has a franchise potential, Gail Priest, with a series of books that are available, that are really well written, that tell a very deep and meaningful story. Franchise potential is wonderful. They love that. Sequels are so much less risky than the first movie, but their producers feel they're timid creatures. Forgive them. They spend a lot of other people's money. They don't want to get racked in an industry that, you're only as good as your last picture. There's no sequel to Titanic, great as a movie as it is, but it could be argued that Clive Cussler wrote the prequel called Raise the Titanic, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just two movies about the same thing. You need to bear in mind quadrant appeal. Is anybody familiar with the idea of the 4 quadrants? That's referring to the audience that you're writing for. Younger and older males, younger and older females. 4 quadrants. It's best if you can appeal to all 4 quadrants. And how do you do that? You have some important characters that represent those quadrants so that they can see themselves. People in the audience can see themselves out there. It's more important today to think about that, because the quadrants can be broken down into subdivisions. It can be broken down into eighths. Am I a woman of color seeing myself up there? Am I a man of color seeing myself? Am I a young person of color? Then we go into gender orientations and non-binary orientations that are possible. Be aware, will people that you want to appeal to see themselves in your property? It may be that you have only 3 of the 4 quadrants in your script. That's okay. If it's a 2-quadrant movie, I would look for ancillary characters, other main characters, talk to characters that will help people see themselves when they're sitting there in the audience. They're not making that connection necessarily consciously, but they will feel acknowledged and they will be more engaged with the story. Now, here's a trick. Austin Camacho, anybody know that name? He's a great writer and he's a great teacher of writing. He told me a great way to create an engaging character, and I preface this saying, I am not a person who is astrologically inclined, but he says the people that have crafted the characteristics of a given star sign have already developed and analyzed characteristics that we already relate to. You've got 12, some would now say 13, different kinds of people that if you follow what those characteristics are, people will automatically relate to them. It's a fascinating thing that's developed. I don't know if the chicken or the egg came first in this case, but there are character studies in the astrological signs. Well, this Virgo, for instance, is very precise and cares about doing things in an orderly manner. This Taurus is incredibly stubborn. It'll help you keep your characters. Try to figure out from your own writing what the astrological sign is in your story, and then see if it's consistent all the way through, except for allowing for the arc of growth of the character. So we've touched on the 4 quadrants. Oh, and here's just a very simple aside. When you're writing your stage directions, when you're describing the action, if it goes more than about 3 lines on the page, hit the return and drop a white line, as Robert McKee phrases it, and keep a lot of white space on that page. If there are dense blocks of text, be they dialogue or action, the eyes of the reader will cross and they will say, do you know what you're doing? Readers want what they call a fast read. It may be that the reading takes less time, but their experience of reading the script feels like it went very quickly because you're making them turn the page to see what's happening next. Part of the way to do that is keep a lot of white space on the page. Your stage directions are 3 lines or less. Now, yes, I am recommending, should you wish, that you sign up for an online course in screenwriting just to cover more basics than I can possibly enter into here. They're not expensive. Many of them can work at your own pace. And I would recommend it, again, remembering the financial stakes involved and the possibility of bringing in an acknowledgement of all the great work that you've done on the novel. Well, a t-shirt is another form of adaptation. Unfortunately, we writers don't get a lot of the merchandising revenue, but that is an idea of the story represented on the t-shirt or in the action figure. And again, I'm not saying that you're going to be writing a DC or a Marvel type of story, but just to be aware, George Lucas became a billionaire on the merchandising, not on the writing. So if there's any percentage that your agent or entertainment attorney can negotiate for you on merchandising, whatever it is, see if that's a possibility. Let's see. Okay, then we go a bit more deeply into mapping the story. I will let you dive deeper into that in when you read the Marlowe book or talk about or do your screenwriting class. Again, this is a very dense bolus of information I'm throwing at you. Bear with me. I'll talk very quickly about the presentation deck. It tells a very quick version of the story. It has images of actors that you think would be good in the roles. It tells who the participants are currently in the project, whether there are other companies involved and who they are. I'll be sending this out to you, provided you've given me your email address, or I can have that again, like I said, from Sharon. If you prefer not to sign up, for my newsletters. I don't sell the list, of course, but it's just a way to sort of build the list for me. Let's see. So you've got to have the rights. You've got to have your concept, your 10-second pitch. We
Can I
know what the
interrupt you for
obstacle.
a second, Robert? Would you like me
Sorry?
to share my screen and put the deck up for you?
Yeah, let's go through it very quickly so that you can have a quick look. You might have to commission some original artwork done. This was done by a company that had optioned the Ben Blackshaw stuff. I made a term in the agreement that anything created during the process of the development that we were doing together would revert back to me at the end. They're very sticky fingers in Hollywood, and they would love to keep the artwork rights and all of that. I made sure that anything created, any drafts created were the rights would revert to me should an agreement end. You're looking at the covers of the German books. Looks very violent. Any of you who know the Eastern Shore looking at the Dead Rise cover, that's actually a brick lighthouse, an octagonal lighthouse, I believe. You can see the two bay bridges in the background there. These are all sort of Chesapeake Bay oriented stories. If you look over at the Taprack Bang cover, you might recognize the American Mariner, which is a target ship for the Airedales over at the Patuxent Naval Air Station. Something for them to shoot at. It's a great wreck. It's a great scene. And if you'll advance a page for me, please, Sharon.
Let's see.
Nice. Here's more artwork created. And then you can see that there's a little bit of an overview. And you can just carry on and go through it. I can talk quickly. Thank you. Film 1. Quick story overview. Cover goods. We've got some artwork that we used, and go on. We'll see where we go from there. The synopsis, and go on from there. You'll have all this. So I just wanted to show it to you. The second book is Nitro Express. Carry on. Synopsis of that. Third story. Synopsis of that. Longer sort of synopsis. Similar franchises. Mission Impossible, Bourne Identity, Jack Ryan, actiony, espionage. A little bit about the economies of scale of shooting the first 3 pictures, which is not beyond the realm of possibility because they're shooting 6 and 8 hours worth of limited series. So this is basically the same thing. It's just where do you put the beginning and the middle and the end, essentially, on a given episode. Distribution, various other things. There's some fan fiction about the Blackshaw series, which is really cool. I've created a Blackshaw app that people can download for free and use. It's about traveling to Smith Island in the Chesapeake Bay, where the Ben Blackshaw series is set, because I was getting a lot of inquiries about that. Possible actors. There's a father-son angle in Dead Rise, so Scott Eastwood, and God willing, if Clint Eastwood is still among us at the time, that would be kind of cool. Okay, great. Are you thinking about the quadrants? Who are you seeing? There we go. Okay. Older women, women of color. You've heard enough from him. There you go. So that is, thank you so much, Sharon. I really appreciate that. that's coming to you as well, in addition to the novel, in addition to um, the adaptation. I'd be grateful if you feel like writing a review. Reviews are great. You do not have to at all, but if you're so motivated, it does make a difference, as you know. I'll be coming out with the 6th Ben Blackshaw book in the next couple of weeks. Sharon, you made mention of the Robert Smalls biopic. They're also having a meeting with Westbrook next week, which is Will Smith's company. He's already engaged on a similar property, but it's more to sort of get to know folks and spread the word about the Robert Smalls piece. Anybody know, by a show of hands, do you know Robert Smalls? Okay, a little bit. Okay, gotcha, Gail. Thank you. In 1862, he had been made. He was enslaved in Charleston, and he had been made the wheelman of a ship moving supplies and material around Charleston Harbor. Very complex waters, the confluence of like at least four rivers. Some of you may know better than I. Right there by Fort Sumter, where the war began. And when the Civil War did begin there, he was made a pilot, a harbor pilot, on a 160-foot gun and transport ship, part of the Confederate Navy at the time. And the situation in his life became so dire that May 12th, 1863, I should know that, of course. Sorry, forgive me. He gathered, when all the Confederate officers were ashore, he gathered his family and the family of all the other enslaved people working on that boat. And he stole a 160-foot gunship and sailed it right past all of the gun batteries of Charleston Harbor and Fort Sumter out to the Union blockade and freedom. It's an amazing story. 3 weeks later, he was sitting down with Frederick Douglass, Edwin Stanton, and Abraham Lincoln, who was asking Robert Smalls if he thought that other black men would fight as valiantly as he had. And Smalls's reply was, well, they're just waiting to be asked. So we got the Militia Act, I believe, of 1862. I'm going to check that, which led to, of course, great movies like Glory and a few other pieces that have come out where it was about. Robert Smalls himself recruited black troops to the order of 5,000 before he said, I think I should go back into the fight. He was made America's first black military captain of the ship that he stole, which was repaired. And he went back and fought in 17 engagements. He was present when the Confederate colors were finally struck at Fort Sumter at the end of the war. With prize money that he and his earnings, he bought his former master's mansion and moved his family into it. And when his former master's wife, who had dementia, we think, staggered up to the doorstep, it was the only address she could remember, staggered up to that very same doorstep, Robert Smalls and his family brought her in and looked after her until her death, which is an astounding act of it's just so magnanimous. I cannot imagine doing it personally. He was then elected to Congress 5 times, negotiated the sale of Paris Island to the federal government as a recruiting station, was a brigadier general in the South Carolina militia, and began what might be construed our first public schools because they were the first free and compulsory schools, I believe, in the country. So that's that story. Lots of things. That is not the 10-second elevator pitch, let me tell you. So what I'd like to do is, with whatever time you've got, and I'm certainly available, is to hear any questions or comments. I apologize if I went all over the place, but again, it's a vast subject. So all of this is to encourage you to consider an adaptation for your own work. and to consider that there is that possibility, and to understand that I believe you already have the skills required to undertake it and execute, if not an Oscar winning script, a competitive script, because that's what it's got to be first.